listener production.
Hello, welcome to The Briefing. I'm Sasha Barbagat. Today we're bringing you a chat with the Housing Minister, Claire O'Neil, as part of our three-part series on the housing crisis in Australia. The issue has devolved into political point scoring and spin, so we wanted to go right to the parties themselves to find out their plan for you.
There's no silver bullet to this housing crisis that we're in. It actually requires governments at a Commonwealth level and a state level to be pulling lots of levers at the same time.
That's coming up in the second half of this episode. First, though, time for the headlines with Antoinette Lattouf. Today's Wednesday, the 25th of September.
Hey, Sasha. G'day, everyone. So world leaders are meeting at the UN's General Assembly in New York today amid fears of an all-out war in the Middle East, and this follows Lebanon's devastating and rising death toll. More than 500 people have been killed in airstrikes launched by Israel in southern Lebanon and the capital. Women, children and aid workers were among them, while tens of thousands have been displaced by the violence. More strikes have been launched this morning, our time, with Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu vowing to keep up the attacks against militant group Hezbollah. That's his line, even though we know civilians are also casualties. The escalation has sparked fear and condemnation from the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres.
We should all be alarmed by the escalation. Lebanon is at the brink. The people of Lebanon, the people of Israel and the people of the world cannot afford Lebanon to become another Gaza.
US President Joe Biden, in his final address to the General Assembly, has warned Israel against an all-out war. He also condemned Hezbollah for cross-border strikes with Israel since October 7. Biden has also called on Netanyahu to accept a ceasefire deal with Hamas, which would also bring the strikes by Hezbollah to an end.
I think it's interesting hearing Biden almost a year in. His calls for a ceasefire are becoming pretty hollow and predictable, I suspect, to many, including to my ears, given that the US continues to arm Israel and provide a lot of political cover, not only for its actions in Lebanon, but for its months of action in Gaza. But returning to Lebanon for a moment, Beirut says shelters have been secured for at least 10,000 internally displaced people. So they're opening schools and other community halls to house these people. And in recent hours, Lebanon's Hezbollah has fired a range of missiles at Israeli air bases and attacked a naval base. Israel, meanwhile, has continued its attack on the Gaza Strip, killing at least 37 people.
Yeah, and also, Antoinette, at this UN General Assembly in New York, where we heard from Antonio Guterres as well as Joe Biden, a number of other world leaders have spoken. Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, is due to speak as well. Now, he is apparently going to talk about, without detail, because it's secret, the final plan to end the war with Russia. But he's also set to ask on the sidelines for permission from the US and other countries to fire long-range missiles in Russia, which would mark a turn in kind of what Ukraine has been allowed, quote unquote, to do in this conflict. Someone else who spoke was actor Meryl Streep, and she was there to talk about what's happening in Afghanistan with the women and what the Taliban is doing. And she condemned the Taliban's restrictions on women, calling for the UN to protect and restore their rights, saying a squirrel has more rights than an Afghan girl at the moment. And we actually did a deep dive on what is happening in Afghanistan back on September 4, really worth a listen. Back home now, the Reserve Bank has held our cash rate steady for the seventh time in a row, despite widespread calls for cuts, of course. This all happened yesterday afternoon with RBA Governor Michelle Bullock confident the 4.35% rate is restrictive enough to lower inflation without crashing the economy. She did concede, though, it'll take some time before our inflation rates reach the comfortable target rate of 2 to 3%. It's currently sitting at 3.8%.
Inflation has come down a long way since it peaked in 2022. Part of this was the resolution of supply chain issues and energy prices easing, and monetary policy has also been doing its job. But inflation is still above our target, and it's proving to be sticky.
Treasurer Jim Chalmers yesterday supported the decision, saying he doesn't second-guess the RBA. A slight change in tune from comments earlier this month where he said interest rate rises were smashing the economy. So that's a bit of a rhetoric shift. While Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor said Australia was at the back of the pack in fighting inflation and bringing down interest rates, because he compared our interest rate movements to the US, Canada and New Zealand and parts of Europe where rates have been coming down since January. So, Sasha, while economists and analysts are unsurprised by the rate remaining the same, of course there was hope amongst consumers and the majority of people that we would follow in the footsteps of the US, who cut rates by 0.5 percentage points just last week. The federal government has sparked anger from conservationists after approving the expansion of 3 coal mines by as long as 40 years. So Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek says the decision was made in accordance with the facts and national environmental law, highlighting that the mines, all in New South Wales, aren't new.
But climate experts say that this is exactly the opposite of what we should be doing in the fight against climate change. It is estimated the 3 projects would generate more than 1.3 billion tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions in their lifetime. Now, Plibersek has also said that these emissions would be considered under the government's safeguard mechanism, and that is designed to cap and reduce emissions from major polluting sites. So they're making all these caveats to what seems like a pretty bad environmental policy. And let's not forget, Labor took this policy to the 2022 election saying that we are going to be champions for the environment and for action on climate change. So I understand why people are pretty upset about this. The Greens have spoken out. Adam Bant, the leader, said the decision was a betrayal of everyone who voted for climate action. And the AFL Event office has been hacked just days out from the sold-out grand final. Officials say scalpers accessed and illegally downloaded an unknown number of corporate ticketing. So they've all been cancelled out of an abundance of caution, Antoinette.
Tickets will be reissued in the coming days, while the AFL Integrity Unit, I love the name of that, is working with police. I just don't know, Sasha, what the plan was for these people who took corporate boxes. Like, were they just going to rock up in suits and pretend they were all colleagues from an IT company or something? Like, what was the plan? How did they think they were going to execute this?
Well, I have a friend who actually ended up in a corporate box by accident over the weekend at a Parkway Drive concert of all things, and he was just a blow-in. You just walk in. There's people everywhere. You just go in and you go, hey, guys, I'm here for the free booze and the free entertainment. No one asks any questions.
Yeah, okay. I'm just imagining like 15 people walking in who are like 19 and pretending that they have corporate box tickets. As we know, Saturday is officially a sellout. More than 100,000 will pack out the MCG to watch the Swans take on the Lions, and TV records are expected to be smashed because it's mainly Melbournians who can get tickets to the grand final.
Yeah, we were talking yesterday, Antoinette, about the entertainment at the game on Saturday with Katy Perry to perform. So there's something in it for everyone, whether you're a footy fan, whether you're a pop music fan. The AFL Grand Final's got it all. Thank you so much for joining us for the headlines today. Next up, it is our deep dive. I chat to the Housing Minister, Claire O'Neil, to get Labor's no-spin policy on housing. Yesterday morning, we brought you a chat with the Liberal Party about what their plan is for housing, should it win the vote at next year's federal election. Well, today we'll be hearing from the people currently in power. There is a lot of noise out there at the moment when it comes to the housing crisis in Australia, and we wanted to give each party a chance to give you their pitch without the spin or political point scoring. We know that when it comes to renting, there are fewer homes available, and that's helping drive up costs, while buying is harder than it's ever been with soaring prices and not enough supply. So today is part 2 of our 3-part series, bringing you an interview with the housing spokesperson of each major party, Labor, the Coalition and the Greens. Joining me now is the Labor Minister for Housing and Homelessness, Claire O'Neil. Minister, welcome to the briefing. I want to get the Labor Party's vision for solving the housing crisis in Australia. So give me your elevator pitch for how you plan to make housing not only more accessible but also more affordable for more Australians.
Yeah, sure. So Labor has a really simple belief, and that is that we want ordinary Australians to have access to affordable housing and ultimately for ordinary people to have access to home ownership. And that's not the case in our country today. And the reasons for that have been really 30 years in the making. We're in the middle of a housing crisis that feels very kind of current, and it's really affecting people's lives. But the seeds of this were actually sown back in the 1990s. And so for 30 years, effectively, we've seen things getting progressively worse and worse and worse. Why is this all happening? When it comes back to it, it's actually something quite simple, and that is for all that 30-year period, we have not been building enough homes in our country. So for everyone who's listening and watching right now, all of the pain that you're experiencing, whether it's, having really nasty interactions with a landlord, whether it's lining up for 3 hours on a Saturday morning for a dilapidated property that you don't even really want to live in, whether it's first homeowners who are not able to keep up with unsustainable price growth, and even that really serious problem we see where an increasing share of people are literally just falling out of the bottom of the market into homelessness. All these things are caused by a general housing shortage. So what is Labor doing about this? We're doing a hell of a lot. The first thing is we've got to build. We have to build more homes, and that will relieve all of those pressures that people are feeling. But at the same time, we recognise there's urgent problems people have right now, and that's why we're taking real action to support renters and taking real action to support people getting into first home ownership for the first time. And what I would just say to you is I think people understand this is actually a long-term problem and it's complicated. I would beware of anyone who is asserting that this is a simple issue that has a simple single solution, and if only everyone was courageous and energetic enough, this wouldn't be a problem. Actually, it's going to require lots of sustained effort over a reasonably long period of time for us to get us into a better position as a country.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so building then, from what I took from that answer, is the main target of the Labor Party. What policies are you going to bring in force to address that?
So we have done a huge amount of work on this. One of the added complications to what I've said there is that housing responsibility in Australia sits across the 3 levels of government, and that makes all the problems that we experience that sit across those 3 levels are just an additional layer of complexity. So the first thing we've done is we've sat down with the state governments and local government and said we need to set a big national target of building 1.2 million homes over the coming 5 years. And within National Cabinet, we've basically worked across the state governments and local governments to set targets and then to set up policies that will help us be able to build more. So a lot of my work at the moment actually isn't in the Parliament. It's working with the states and territories to unlock land, to help builders get on track and to basically create more homes. That's just a part of our work, though. We're also doing things like increasing Commonwealth rent assistance so that renters are better supported, working with the states to improve renters' rights, and then also that important pathway to home ownership. So big expansions of the home guarantee scheme, which is helping about a third of first homeowners into the market, and also this legislation that's been working its way through the Parliament, the Help to Buy scheme, which will help people on lower incomes access home ownership when they wouldn't otherwise be able to do so.
Part of the issue around housing supply and making houses available for buying is surely also limiting the number of investment properties. Now, we saw Labor take a policy of winding back negative gearing and capital gains tax concessions in the 2019 election, which didn't appear to work. Would Labor consider those moves again, considering how big of an issue it is that there are so many investors in the market and not enough first home buyers?
It's not Labor's policy to do that. So we have a different approach to this problem. And the first thing I would say is that if we just think about building and supply, that's got to be a key focus. And whether it's investors or first home owners owning property, really we need more houses in the market. So one of the reasons that rents are so high, for example, at the moment, it's just a supply problem. We don't have enough homes and we have too many people who are looking for rentals. So we're focusing on building, focusing on helping renters and focusing on people getting into the market. With regard to negative gearing, as you point out, we did give the Australian people the opportunity to vote for Labor when winding back some of those policies was our approach, and the Australian people didn't agree to that. We didn't get elected, so that's not the policy we have.
You know, with the issue of supply, in Labor's mind, once the supply issue is fixed, does that fix the price problem? Because people are priced out. Supply is obviously part of the problem, but does that address the entire issue?
It is without question the biggest problem we have in Australia right now is that we don't have enough housing. So all the problems that I've just talked about there, whether it's house prices growing unsustainably high, whether it's problems that people are having really too many people fighting over the same rentals. That's why you're seeing those big queues and price inflation in rents, these sorts of things, and the problems facing first homeowners. At the end of the day, all of these problems come back to the fact that we don't have enough homes. So I just say to everyone who's listening right now, just really be clear about that. The fundamental problem, lack of housing, the answer has to be we've got to build more. And so for any political parties who are kind of in this debate who don't have that as their focus, we need to ask why, because that is fundamentally what's going on here.
Will Labor need quite a bit of extra money in order to pay for these policies? And if so, how do you plan to pay for them?
We have put in place policies which total $32 billion, which is, I think, for most people, a kind of unquantifiably large amount of money. This is a really massive investment in housing, and it encompasses all the things I've talked about. So the work with the states to build 1.2 million homes, the support for renters that we've offered through Commonwealth Rent Assistance, and things like the Help to Buy scheme, which will help first homeowners into the market. All of these things are big and expensive, but I don't pretend that everything, is going to be solved in 2 or 3 years, nor should any politician be claiming that. This is a problem that's been cooking for 30 years, and we're doing everything we can at a federal level to try to help, and we're going to have to keep doing that. One thing I just encourage people to just reflect on, Sasha, is we're the Commonwealth government. Federally, Commonwealth governments have sort of dipped in and out of housing as an issue. For most of the period of the last time the coalition were in office, they didn't even have a Commonwealth housing minister. So effectively, the Commonwealth has, over a 50-year period, really stepped back and back and back from the problem of housing our citizens. Our government is actually moving right back into this. So the work that we're doing with National Cabinet, those policy approaches that I've talked to you about, it's actually quite unique. The Commonwealth hasn't really been involved in the mainstream question of housing Australians for a long, long time in our country. But we're there now because we recognise that this is such an acute problem for our citizens, and it's not going to go away unless the Commonwealth puts its shoulder to the wheel and helps with this.
One of the things with a federal election is obviously that the people get to look back at the last 3.5, 4 years and kind of assess whether they think enough has been done in the policies and the areas that matter most to them. Housing, we know, is a huge issue, whether you are looking to buy, whether you already own, or whether you're a renter, or whether you're in social housing. It's such a widespread issue for so many people at the moment. Those same people might be looking back at the last 3.5 to 4 years of Labor in power and going, well, they've fallen short of building enough houses that was set as a target. Why should I give them another chance to fix this issue when they've already had a chance to do so?
I don't think people expect that in the 2.5 years that Labor's been in office federally, that the problem's going to be fixed. I think everyone in this debate realises that this has been going for a long time. Perhaps not someone of your age, but for someone of my age, I'm 44. We thought we had a housing crisis when I was in my 20s. And here we are 20 years on, and things have gotten considerably worse than they were when housing affordability was a main anxiety for young people when I was, in my teens and in my 20s. So I think people recognise that this has been a long time coming. I think it's absolutely apparent to me as a politician and a minister in our government that things have gotten to the point where every politician in the country has to be really focused on this. We've got to have states and our federal government working together, and we've actually got that happening for the first time. But it is going to take a little bit longer than just one term of one federal Labor government to fix a problem that's been going on for so long.
You mentioned Help to Buy. We also know there's Build to Rent as two of the major schemes that Labor is currently trying to get through Parliament. And the criticism I've seen around those policies specifically is that the impact doesn't seem to be far-reaching enough. It'll affect thousands of people when we know millions of people are struggling. Do you stand by those policies and their ability to help the millions who need it?
Yeah, I absolutely do, because those are not the only two things that the government is doing. We are tackling this problem from every possible angle, and that's what needs to happen. There's no silver bullet to this housing crisis that we're in. It actually requires governments at a Commonwealth level and a state level to be pulling lots of levers at the same time. The two schemes that you mentioned there are important pieces of the puzzle here, and they are the Commonwealth doing things that the Commonwealth has not done before to try to stimulate more construction of housing in our country and make sure that ordinary people can access first home ownership. So if I can just explain quickly, the Help to Buy one that's been the subject of debate in the Parliament in the last couple of weeks, that is a scheme that will help 40,000 paramedics, childcare workers, nurses, teachers get access to their own home where they would otherwise never have the opportunity to do so. And the design of this scheme is a little bit like the government coming in as the bank of mum and dad and saying to those people who are on pretty low incomes, we recognise that you don't have a heap of financial backing here, so we are going to help you with the deposit and we're going to help you pay off your mortgage so you can own your own home. I mean, the fact that we've got people standing in the path of that, I've got to say, is pretty frustrating. We don't just have a broken housing market in Australia. We've got some breakages in our housing politics where we've got, a parliament that should be working together to try to help ordinary people with this crucial problem. And instead, good things that the Labor government is trying to do are being blocked and held up for reasons that I think are totally political.
I want to hear a bit more about Labor's plan to directly address rental affordability. That's another huge issue at the moment. And I know you've touched on it a little bit, but we've focused more on buying. So I'd love for you to take us through Labor's rental policy.
This is a challenging one because most of the levers for addressing the experience of renters sit with the state governments. And so that's why in terms of the conditions for renters in Australia, the way that the government has approached that is to work with the states. So we have set something called the Better Deal for Renters. This is what we hope to be nationally consistent standards which make the rental experience much better. Things like you can only have a rent increase once a year, that you can't just get booted out of your home for no good reason. The landlord has to have a proper reason to take back the property if they're going to do that. So these sit with the states, and we're working with the states at the moment to get them all implemented. It requires all of the states to legislate separately in each of their states and territories, which is an irritation, but that's the Constitution. On the financial side, the main lever we have to support people is through something called Commonwealth Rent Assistance. So this is a payment that is received from the Commonwealth and it's given to people who are recipients of other forms of welfare. So if you're a single parent or if you're unemployed or if you're on youth allowance, you'll probably also get rent assistance. We've increased that payment by more than 40% since we've been in office, and that makes a real difference to the people at the kind of bottom of the rental market who are struggling the most. One of the things I experienced as a renter when I was a younger person is my ultimate aspiration was to not be a renter anymore. I wanted to own my own home, and that's why a big focus for us is how do we support people out of rent and into home ownership.
Is social housing forming any part of Labor's plans, building it, making it easier to access? Tell me about that.
That's a huge part of our plan. And if you get right into the kind of policy of housing, what you'll find is that over a really long period of time, both the Commonwealth and state governments have radically underinvested in social and affordable housing in our country. Pretty much every other developed country in the world has a strong engagement of government in housing for that bottom share of the population of people who would otherwise be kind of in and out of homelessness. So we've done a few really big things here. You probably heard about something called the Social Housing Accelerator, which is where the Commonwealth gave $2 billion to the states to get them to basically turbocharge bringing new supply of social housing into the state systems. And then the other really massive thing we've done is we've set up a fund called the Housing Australia Future Fund. This is a $10 billion fund that gives $500 million each year out the door to support social and affordable housing. And we just announced the first round of that, which will build 13,700 new social and affordable homes around the country. That's just round one. So this is the biggest investment in social and affordable housing in Australia for 30 years. And it's a really important part of what we're going to need to do here.
Minister, before we let you go, you mentioned it yourself that 20 years ago, the housing crisis and housing issues were a big talking point. It persists, and it feels like for the last few years it's been all that we can talk about, and it feels so pervasive. Can it actually be fixed, or should we adjust to a new normal in Australia that renting is going to be expensive and buying a home is out of reach for most?
I don't want to adjust to a new normal, and I don't accept that that's the future for our country. What I see is that governments across the country have failed to do enough about this problem for an entire generation. And that's how we ended up with the seeds being sown of this crisis in the late 1990s to getting to 2024, where this is a dominant issue in the lives of millions of people. This is what our governments are for. It is for alleviating problems like this one. It's just that the problem is not something that's simply and easily solved. What we need is governments at a Commonwealth level and a state level who see this as a critical priority, and it doesn't disappear after a year, that it's a critical priority for a decade. And then once we see that kind of resolve from our governments, which I hope you hear and see from me, then we are going to see real progress here. And I do want to see young people not having that anxiety that, they feel they're never going to have secure and affordable housing. That's not good enough for me. That's not what Australia is meant to be about. And I'm really fiercely resolved to try to do something real to fix it.
Claire O'Neill, thanks so much for your time today. We do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Sasha.
Claire O'Neill, the Minister for Housing and Homelessness, speaking with me there. And that is it for this episode of The Briefing. Thanks so much for listening. Before you go, if you got something out of this episode and there's someone in your life who you think might get something out of it as well, why not share it with them? Is a really important way that we can keep doing what we're doing here at The Briefing, so we'd really appreciate it. Also following us on socials like on TikTok and Instagram. Also subscribing to our channel on YouTube, search Listener Newsroom. That's a really big help as well. We'll be back in your feed with another episode this afternoon at 3 p.m. I'm Sasha Barbagat. See you next time.
Listener.